Okay, Hemu, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone. For those of you wondering, where's my CLE code? I promise you I will give it to you. I've been told that if I do it at the beginning, that all of you are going to leave. So I have to hold on to it just a little bit longer. And then there'll be a time in the middle of the presentation where I will promise you give it to you. And at the end, I'll give it to you again in case you didn't get to write it down. So let's get started. Today's webinar that we're doing is called Navigating Beauty Industry Compliance, Building Systems to Manage Evolving Regulations. We're going to talk today about quite a few things, but ultimately one of the biggest things to understand is there's lots of regulations happening in the beauty industry. Some of it is affecting you directly, some incidentally, some collaterally, however it may be coming to you. But the thing that we're going to focus on is not so much what is that regulation, what does it specifically say, how do you analyze it, what is the legal recommendation on how to implement something like that. But instead, we're going to talk about once that has happened, how do you actually build it into your program, into your product development lifecycle, and put into your what I call compliance by design. Um, those are things that affect every company who's paying attention right now or who's even in this webinar right now from the perspective of the fact that when you do get counsel advice and then the product side or the R&D side takes over from there, you maybe say a year later or 2 years later, somebody says, wait a minute, I think we're missing something. Somebody did an analysis of us, some external third party, and they're telling us that we didn't do this correctly under the law. And those issues come up. So we're going to look at how do you build something that's holistic in nature, sustainable, long-term, part of the way you just do business, with the understanding of what those laws are all the way to release to market. And so with that, let's get started a little more. Who am I? Who is this person talking to? My name's Hemu Nigam. I joined actually Venable 4 years ago almost, and having spent a career in different settings, but a lot of it in the consulting side, where even though I'm the lawyer on the team, we ended up building inside of Venable, one of the country's very unique practices where we are a team of about 30 or so consultants coming from completely different backgrounds, sometimes in government, in Fortune 10, Fortune 500 companies, having worked in regulatory, in compliance, having worked in privacy or in product or human rights or sustainability, all the different things that good consulting teams bring to the table. And so that's what we bring to our clients. We speak to 16 different languages and we understand global, even if we're acting local, what I call global. Haven't trademarked it yet, but if anybody steals it, you beat me to it. So that is something we've been talking about. And my own background, I've done a lot of the consulting side, but where I focus is how do you get it done in a way that you're not fixing things after something has happened because there was a piece missed or somebody didn't do their part of it. So how do you approach a company in knowing all of these different moving parts? And one of the greatest things about Venable is we are a 125-year-old law firm, but because of that, we have seen so many different things in history. And now we are sitting inside a firm that recognizes that and has that kind of historic capital, and we're merging it with the way to consult in a completely fast-moving, high-speed environment, not only just pushed forward through AI and everything else happening, but just the way the world works now in a connected setting. So that's how we approach things. If you look at what's in front of you, just a short description. I won't go into the details here. We can do follow-up meetings with anybody who wants it. But just thinking through, we're talking about how do you do a life cycle in the world of complying with whether it's a regulatory inquiry, it's in a problem that has already happened. So now you're responding to a regulator, or it could be something like, we have to do this. There's a new law. How do we make it happen in a way that we're not coming back again and again, or having an issue or some private right of private action shows up at your doorstep? In this world of consulting and the life cycle of consulting, there's different areas that we focus on that you see in front of you. There's a lot of details under each one, but suffices to, I guess the easiest way to think about it is when you go from release to release to market, legal to release to market, there's and adjustments that can be made after. we cover the breadth of that. Whether you're validating certain claims you want to put on your label, it could be you have some kind of litigation at your doorstep and you want to understand, well, who's funding it? Where are they coming from? Who are these 10 people that just were handed in a deposition list? Or it could be, all right, so we know we're going to do these kinds of products. We have to look at our supply chain and look at the vendors, and we're concerned about a particular vendor that may have an issue. Maybe there's a child labor issue or a child safety issue. Maybe there's something that's happening that's not really in line with the spirit or the philosophy that this company stands for. Or there's regulations happening everywhere. How do we impact that? How do we get in front of that legislator? And how do we make some kind of policy impact on those, whether it's creating a new law, getting something amended, defining something better than it is defined in the past, and so that it becomes a competitive advantage when it's defined the way your industry may care about. So there's a lot of stuff that happens here that we delve into, but overall, that is the way to look at how Venable Blue sits inside of Venable LLP, as we say internally. Okay, jumping to the next slide. Why us? If you're on this webinar, you probably already know these kinds of things, but we have been in the beauty, we as Venable, the law firm, have been in the beauty, cosmetics, toilet industry for quite some time with multiple clients, same in the toy, same in the fashion. All of these things matter here because they all are bound by something very unique, which in my mind is unique because this is retail products that have regulatory influence touching them from different angles constantly, whether it's overseas or US, whether it's federal or stateside. There was a world, for example, in certain settings where, oh, that's a Fed issue. That's not something we worry about. Or the Feds have spoken and therefore we know what to do. States are rising up all over the place and taking advantage of the fact that they can regulate and the fact that their constituents care about what happens when they do regulate. They get positive feedback from their own voting public. So it's inspiring them continuously to even perhaps regulate more or take a look more. Okay. As I was talking about, and I'm not going to go into the details into those kinds of things, I will tell you the firm itself has some exceptional, wonderful people that work on the legal analysis and helping clients think through these things. People like Laura Rich, and I'll say it very slowly because some of you are going to write it down, but Laura Rich, who's an expert in what I call, I know we're not supposed to say expert, but really skilled at PFAS, things we're going to talk about. We have Claudia Lewis, we have Ashley Craig, we have Lori. I will give you the names later, but or Tarina will punch them in the chat. And you know what I just realized? I'm going to pause for a second. I did not give Tarina a chance to introduce herself, and I made the biggest blunder you could possibly make as a webinar person. So Tarina, I'm going to give it to you, and then we're going to come back to this because it'll give people time to digest the slide as well. So apologies for that.
Sounds great. Thank you, Hemu. Hi, everyone. My name is Trina, and I'm a program analyst here at Venable Blue, where I do in-depth research to support the claims that companies want to make on their product labeling, packaging, digital marketing, and advertising campaigns. So you might be asking yourself why an analyst is speaking to you. And that's because I started my career in the beauty industry. So prior to Venable, I worked at a luxury beauty company called Sisley Paris, where I developed and executed operational strategies for sales and merchandising across 350 counters and our 2 boutiques. And when I visited the counter, I was starting to see that new technologies were showing up at the counter. So a scalp or face analysis that would give you all this data on your scalp or your skin health. And because I had studied data ethics and I had a personal interest in data privacy, I realized that all these types of technologies were collecting information, and there was this privacy aspect to the beauty industry that was not as well discussed on the operational side. So the more I spoke to Hemu, who has a lot of background in the digital privacy and security realm, the more we realized that we had to create a conversation around this. So in October, we launched our inaugural When Beauty Goes Digital event. It included a few keynotes and 3 panels from over 10 beauty companies, including large household beauty names, a few beauty tech startups, and indie companies, and had a turnout of over 40 attendees. And one of our attendees noted that the event was especially interested for indie brands who don't have the resources to invest in compliance upfront. So we wanted to kind of start a webinar series touching on these different compliance topics. So we'll have a quarterly webinar series throughout this year, and this webinar is the first in this series. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Hemu, to continue the presentation. But if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll flag them to Hemu to respond.
And so now you all see why we're doing this webinar. I will say that apologies during the biggest blunder in the world to not let the host actually be the host. And so, by the way, also when you're looking at what we're talking about, we think about this from having been on the ground, and that's a big deal. Even before I joined here, Venable, I had worked with some beauty clients, and you see things from perspective, especially in the indie space, that often becomes part of the bigger, larger organizations. I will say, when we're thinking about these things, there's a lot of states that are passing laws. Even just a quick survey was, okay, well, there's 7 states caring about extended producer responsibility, something we've seen coming up in the plastics industry, and we have worked with clients in that area. And how do you even define, is your polymer the right polymer? Should it be falling under the definition of a banned plastic? Those kinds of things. But their states are getting emboldened and empowered to do more in that. There's focus on human health, where you're talking about personal care products and the regulations around that and what kind of chemicals there might be. You've heard of these terms. If you're on this, you may just be dealing with them pretty intensely. PFAS, PFAS, what's known as per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and they're sometimes known as forever chemicals. I know there's a lot of research still being done on whether they are in fact forever, whether there's a human impact on it or health and environmental impact on it. Those things are still in progress. But the reality is, from a state and federal perspective, and before I go to the next screen, on the modernization MOCRA cosmetics regulation, there's also a federal focus on this, from adverse event recording, or record keeping, which also becomes a question of, well, do I have to go find the adverse event or do I not? And Claudia Lewis, one of our partners, focuses on this quite a bit. And so I'm not going to go into the details and the legalities because she's the expert on that. Oops, I said expert again when I shouldn't. So turning to the next slide, we decided what might be helpful is just to do a tiny little chart to just showcase the different things that are happening in the state side itself, specifically around PFAS. So if you look at what's already in effect in California, you have prohibitions against the sale of cosmetics containing intentionally added PFAS, not accidentally, not unknowingly, but intentionally. There are other states that focus on intentional is matters, but not unknowingly. Those kinds of questions are coming up. There's some states that are saying we're going to expand the list, not just add PFAS, but also add formaldehyde, for example, or mercury as a banned substance. I think Washington in particular cares about that. There's other states that are saying, let's require reporting. When you do have something in it, you have to report it. Other states are saying you plain old prohibit it. So there's a range of different things that are happening. And as counsel or in-house counsel, you're, I'm sure, getting questions from people and say, well, what do I do? How do I deal with this? What does it mean to the product? But, I have these chemicals in it and they're creating the shine that I need or the texture I need in the beauty product that I have on the shelf right now, and it's selling really well. But is this going to have an impact on that? So all sorts of questions start coming up when you're looking at this. We did more for a takeaway, and I will say we made a decision, should we use colors and pretty colors on the slide, but we thought, what, keep it simple. The reality is PFAS could be found in different types of cosmetics. The reality that's coupled with that is that regulators are paying attention, and they're paying attention quite closely if you really break it down. whether it could be lipstick, it could be eyeshadow, moisturizer, robe. I remember, and the customer is also paying attention. I remember I was going on see one of the television shows for an interview, and the makeup person came to me and said, "Look, get yourself color matched. Go to this place, talk to this person, choose these kinds of products. Don't choose those kinds of products." And her thing was, this is for her, from her perspective, these are the ingredients she wanted to see in the product that she was telling me to get, and not the other ones that I could have normally gotten or that might have been recommended at the counter. So there's a lot of attention, even on the retail side, on the sales side, on the people who are using this in businesses, for that matter, like a makeup artist in a television show. So these are the kinds of things that can have an effect on what we do when it ends up in the market, and how we get there. So I'm going to stop there for a second and turn to the next slide. Is there media around this? I mean, I think you guys have all who are listening right now would have seen this. There's articles coming out about how this is impacting short-term, long-term. Is there concerns about it? And there's a lot of what I would call still in progress research. There's no perfect conclusion yet. There's no definitive answers right now. These are still works in progress from a research perspective, from an impact perspective, from how are these affecting health or environment. Those questions are still unanswered, but the reality is the government is regulating. The reality is the government is relying on the kinds of things they are seeing and making decisions on. It's time to regulate. And that's what matters here. Also, the other piece of it is there's not just a regulation, it's a transparency issue that's rising and coming to fruition. So in other words, people are saying, well, maybe we don't know what the real impact is, but you should put it on the label. And now you have labeling things that you are impacted by. So when you look at these things, and the whole point that we're talking today is, okay, so I got my lawyer, who's going to tell me how to think about it, and then I will make a decision and I will implement. And in many ways, that is one of the ways that simple compliance often happens. And we're going to talk through in the next few minutes about how do you turn that into a very holistic approach as opposed to what I would call a linear approach. So regulation passes. There's new requirements. There's timelines for implementation. There's those kinds of things happening. And there's a team that will say, okay, new reg, we tried to affect it. We did the best we could. This is the reg that's on the table. It's going into effect. And then legal takes it and says, okay, let me analyze that. Determine what the legal impact are, what are the risks associated with it. And then once that's done, there is a requirement to comply. There's a deadline. Hey, product R&D, start working on this. And they're maybe looking at it and saying, okay, I got to reformulate. I have to maybe adjust something. I have to deal with whatever's in the ingredients. And I have to figure out how to put something eventually on the shelf that is just as good, has the right texture that I have using PFAS, and it's the right kind of shine that I need maybe in a hair product. Whatever it might be, those are things that the product is really trying to focus on. How do I still get the best product out there based on the fact that I have to make these decisions? And then some ingredient changes may happen, some decisions are made, and people think, okay, we had regulation coming in, the legal analyzing and product handling it, we're good. And that's oftentimes, and this, especially in smaller companies, these are some of the biggest challenges you could have, because there are going to be different challenges in different states and different requirements, including the federal. And sometimes if you're an international brand, how do you balance between sometimes a more restrictive regime in a different part of the world than the part that you're talking about here? And those questions continuously arise. You could be looking at, for example, in California, is not the same, that the laws are not written. I've seen laws as an example where in one state you read a law and then another one gets introduced in another state, and then you go back to the original. It's like a copy and paste. And then there's organizations that will then send them out to legislators and say, this is the law you want. It's been done by one of the leaders in the country. You need to copy it, and what I would call copycat laws. Then there's other states who may say, well, in my state, we work differently. I was actually talking to a senator in a particular state, and sometimes when you're talking to a senator or a rep, the reaction is, hey, get me a lobbyist who can work with me to really define how best to do this. This particular senator said to me, we do things our way. I don't need anybody on the ground. I don't want to talk to lobbyists. We will figure it out. And that in itself can end up leading to a piece of regulation that is, I'll use a word here, formulated differently than other regulations. And the ingredients of that regulation can have an impact on how do you comply in one part of the country, for example, versus another, and how do you make those decisions. So this is why a linear process can actually have, and I know this is being dramatic, but we're saying devastating results. But at the end of the day, if you have a regulatory investigation or a civil action, that can be devastating, no matter what company you are, how big or small you are. And so when you look at these things, one of the things that matters is what is legal doing? And there's so many different things. And some of you are not sitting inside of legal who are on this call, so it's good that we go through this. But when you're looking at a lot of the things that are happening, there's all sorts of things that legal is, and I'm saying legal, and I mean outside counsel or in-house counsel, whatever it might be. But when you're looking at how do you comply, there's pressures. There's pressures of, will this be a $10 million fine potentially, or could this be a $100 million fine if we didn't comply properly, or if we had failed to comply in time, whatever it might be. Then there's other pressures. How do you even interpret the law? How do you figure out what is this regulation really getting at? And is this a regulation that the regulator passed and the enforcement arm of the state is thinking, well, I have so many different priorities, I will come to this later. So even if it goes into effect in January, I may not actually look at this until July. I may make this, let people get warmed up, let them get situated, and then I'll come and take a look in a year. So there's questions around how much of the compliance pressures are there for immediate and what level of compliance. And those are a lot of things that your lawyers, if you're a non-lawyer on this webinar, your non-lawyers are thinking, or your lawyers are thinking about and trying to figure out what is urgent. There may be other laws that are in effect that they have to deal with. There may be multitudes of things that are completely unrelated. You could have a technical thing like Tarina was talking about when you're sitting at the counter and there's a face image taken of your face, and then the color balancing is done, but now it's stored somewhere, and your legal team is saying, I got to deal with a whole new privacy thing that's happening, and trying to make sure that they're compliant with the existing privacy policy, the collections, the deletion, the sharing, the consent. That's completely different than what I'm actually selling at the counter. So those issues are being dealt with. So there's a multitude of things that your lawyers are thinking about. Then there's also, what if it's a new regulation that has not really come out before? It has not been talked about. It's not, something that everyone's known is going to happen 5 years ago, but it's something that hits you, even if you had warning, say, a year ago, because this was coming, but it can fundamentally change the product that you sell. And those are things that you have to think about. And then lastly, what is the real pressure here? Is this something everyone in the industry can take advantage of? Are there some that are going to be simply not available? Is there a competitive advantage here to comply quickly? How do you stack rank that is what your lawyers are thinking about. Interestingly, when we go into companies, what we find, and I remember sitting with somebody in the product side who actually said to me, can you, as our external person, write an email to the legal side telling them what our concerns are? Because if I do it, they're not going to listen. And I've had the exact same request on the legal side when somebody said to me, can you write a note to our product side or marketing side and tell them that these are things that are required to be done, because if I send it, they may not listen. And it's not because people are not trusting each other. It simply comes down to one simple thing. There's one takeaway of 20 years of doing this is understanding. It's understanding who each group is, understanding what their priorities are, understanding where they're coming from. For that matter, understanding how you even define a particular thing. So somebody might say, well, when I approach this regulation, the product side might hear something completely different than what you're saying when you use the word regulation, or you use the word law, or you use the word compliance. And then they're also looking at it and saying, well, what does this mean? I just did this entire R&D on it. I know it's safe for humans. I know it's going to be maybe no environmental impact on this. And now I have to start again, but I have such a perfect product on the shelf right now. And I had other things that I was going to do. I was going to create this new line of product, or a line of business, and that's going to be impacted. And yet the lawyer side is saying you got to do this, but they may not tell you or come to you and talk about it. It may be, all right, I'll figure it out. I'm going to have to adjust some things that'll get delayed, and off it goes. And then sometimes there's confusion in priority. Who's going to work on what? Do we have enough resources? Maybe we don't. Let's take the risk. And then tying these two together, something interesting that I've seen happen quite a bit, which is who's the person who ultimately makes the decision? And sometimes it's as linear as, well, legal gives advice, product makes the decision. Or sometimes it's there are times when legal is going to command you have to do this and product must comply. But then again, people look at the chain of command, like using the word command. And I know I've done this inside of a company where you click and say, oh, do you report to? Oh, you don't report to me. I don't have to listen to you. Those kinds of things start happening, and they're not said out loud, but they're things to be aware of when you're dealing with such difficult challenges that affect the revenue, the product, the reputation. It could affect how much sales you get. It affects a whole supply chain of different types of things. And also, those are other things that product is thinking about. Well, if I do this, where am I even going to get the replacement for this? And how do I get that? Or, hey, people on the ground who make the deals with the vendors that are going to give me this, go get this. Well, the vendors are saying, I was working on this. I'm selling this. I don't even sell that. Go to this other person. You go to the other person. I don't have capacity to do that. That's a huge request. Where is this coming from? And so and that could be in the US or outside the US. So those are other challenges that are also coming into play here. So that brings us to, so what do you do? How do you even handle this left and right challenge, or right and left, or however you want to look at it, but this left and right challenge of in a linear environment, and how do you make it more holistical in your approach? And interestingly, what I had said before is it starts with understanding. I've called people together, and I'll give you a really good example. I actually called a team of engineers on a different project together, and I said, look, here's 15 different things that have been called out by regulators that need to happen. Spend the day in the room, come back and let me know which ones you can do, and technically or operationally get done. At the end of the day or the afternoon, I go back, and there's, of this list of 15, there's a few that were, yes, we can do this. Yes, we can do this. And then no's. And I'm thinking, that's not making sense. There's something off here. And what I didn't realize is that I hadn't taken the time to teach and understand what the product or the engineering folks were thinking about as their hurdles on how they frame even the problem to be solved. And interestingly, I went back in and I said, look, let's come back again. I'll supply food. And what we're going to do is, first, I'm going to talk about where this is all coming from. And second, we're going to talk about what are your hurdles that you built into your answers. And what I learned is a lot of times the team that you're working with might simply be saying, I don't have the budget for that, without actually telling you and making a decision, which is, I can't do this, rather than, if I had the budget, I could do it. And then we change the conversation. Let's assume you have more money than X, and X person in the world. How would you solve these problems? And leave it up to me to go figure out how to budget. Came back, 80% of the solutions were identified out of that list that I had given them. And so I realized there's an understanding, that communication, a interaction that has to take place, that can be really critical. So from my perspective, the way to start any of this is what I call scoping and vision. Let's actually sit down and help everyone come together and understand what's happening in the world of the regulatory landscape. How are regulators thinking? I had a CEO of a company say to me, what happens if I don't comply to the list of things? And I explained it, and I said what their life is going to be like, what the company is going to go through, the pressures. And he actually said, I've asked all my lawyers this question, and no one's ever told me that. And I said, well, they probably did tell you. It was maybe you heard it in legal speak. I'm telling you what your life is going to be like, and you have to understand that's the impact it's going to have on you. And then the conversation shifted to, when you need anything, just come and tell me what it really means. And that in itself helped in terms of scoping in the future and identifying how do you even determine what you're going to focus on and figuring out what is the end goal. Sometimes the immediate goal is change the ingredient. Maybe the end goal is to identify a way to hit 50 states, knowing that there's going to be regulations constantly changing. There's a constriction happening. More regulations are coming. More ingredients are going to have to be changed. And so let's think this through. This is step one in a long journey that may be happening. And so when you're thinking about these things, defining, and I may have actually skipped a slide here, but so once you define your clear business vision, that's really what this title of this slide is. Then it turns into, okay, well, how do we approach this? How do we get to really start on this? And that's when the conversations between individuals that you have brought together are happening. That's when you're looking at it and saying there's a lot of initiatives, and I, as legal, understand that the company has a lot of initiatives. There's a lot of pressure on R&D and product to work on this and this and this, and the marketing side is saying, if I can get into this particular market, or there's an emerging market, and if I have this kind of product and you can find a way to get us there, we have a whole new revenue stream. There may be a pressure like that. And then they're balancing that as well. Legally, there's all sorts of things I have to comply with. Which one do I do? And so defining that, stack ranking it, really creating a holistic approach to this can have a great impact. Hey, Tarina.
Hi, Hemu.
Um,
Just
we
wanted
had
to,
a thing, if she shows up, it means I have to stop because there's something about to happen.
yes, so since we've got into the middle of the webinar, we wanted to take some time to announce the CLE code at this point. And so the CLE code is Beauty Industry 25 with a capital B and a capital I. So I'll repeat that one more time. The CLE code is Beauty Industry 25 with a capital B and a capital I. So apologies, Hemu, for interrupting, but
Oh, no
I'll
problem.
continue now.
No problem at all. So that's how we kept everybody here for at least halfway through. But again, beauty industry 25, capital B, capital I, the 25, not 2025, but 25. Anyway, so what we were talking about is now once you get this understanding between legal and product, that's when the real conversations happen, because now product is looking at this and saying, okay, they understand me. Legal is looking at it and saying, I never even knew that those are some of the things that product or R&D has to deal with. And in an interesting way, I'll give you a perfect example of this. When there's going to be a discussion on regulations, who comes to those kinds of meetings? All the lawyers do, all the regulatory people, the policy people. And sometimes you look in the room, and I've sat in these rooms and I'm thinking, okay, who's here from product? Who's here from engineering? Who's here from marketing? Who's here from public relations? Who's here from the team that deals with strict impact on other countries where things might be viewed differently? Where is that group of individuals, what I would call an XFN or cross-functional team of individuals? And weirdly, like I was saying before, the question becomes, who's the driver? Who's the leader? And those are things that you have to really work through. As I was saying, sometimes they'll call people like us from the outside and say, come in, embed yourselves. You don't report to anyone. You're the floater. And therefore, your job is to get alignment. Alignment is what drives everything forward inside a company. Once you have this communication happening. Okay. So I guess I have a lot more clicks here, but ensuring that how do you turn that regulation into a product design? That's one of the most important things I have found is if it's designed from day one correctly. Design actually means, you've figured out that of all the different, let's say we're using PFAS again, there's all these ingredients in it. If we take this one out, replace it with this one that's available in the market, then that's going to be okay. And it may actually cover the majority of the states. Maybe there's some risk there, but the lawyers have told me that that state is actually less of a concern than others, or there's going to be a movement on the federal side that's going to eventually get us there. So maybe it's time to get ahead of the curve and get more restrictive now in terms of what we're developing than having to change it in the future. So those kinds of conversations can happen, and you're not only identifying an impact, but you're mitigating it. You might also say, there's a supply chain person here. They're telling us there's no way that ingredient's going to work. So we vetted that out, and it's not, we've thrown you the regulation, we've thrown you the legal analysis and figure this out. It's, we're working as a team. We're all in it together. The end goal is actually going to be a advantage in the market when you know that you can go out with a media campaign, a marketing campaign, communication with even regulators. Hey, we're ahead of the curve. We're getting this done before you could even blink an eye. So this is kind of the kind of things that become part of a conversation where holistically you're approaching it. As a company, your teams are starting to understand each other. And then I know used to be difficult when you had a lab in New Jersey and you had your marketing team sitting in New York, you had your advertisers sitting in San Francisco, and how do you coordinate all of that was now completely changed. And when we look at us, we're on Zoom. I'm sitting in LA. You might not even know that. I'm sitting in Los Angeles. Half the people on this call are New York, Washington, and other parts of the country. So that kind of environment makes a big difference now that we're in that comfort level of being on Zoom altogether. And I know some of that sounds silly to say in a meeting about cosmetics, but that's the reality of it. Now, when we turn further here into just translation and design, or even what I would call impact, one of the things that we also find is that getting that roadmap built from the beginning to the end, rather than saying, this is what I want to see, but understanding that these are all the different steps that have to be gone through. And every step is going to require some kind of alignment. It's going to require a agreement of the teams that are, and a voice that everyone's voice is heard. All of those kinds of things become really important to also understand that once that product gets released, what is the impact? Is it going to be people looking at it and saying, I have only so much supply here that if I don't get this right, I'm going to run out of that product or that ingredient. And now you're going to have to make a change, say in 2 years. That really long-term thinking through, how much supply do you have to even bring into this? Or is it something you can develop, or you can create a supply, you can create even a market out there in the world where people are saying, this is coming, let's start developing these kinds of things. Another thing that happens is you have to have a shift in your marketing. That's something often overlooked. And I say that because there may be a huge positive impact in the marketing campaigns that are going, but you're going to have to pull the commercial or pull the ad campaign, pull the way you design the bottle or the plastic or the labeling on what you're selling on the shelf. You may have to change all those things because of what's happening here. So many little teeny considerations. Even the retailer might say, wait, I didn't even think about that. I have a different sign over here. I'm going to have to do something about this. Or you have this shelf space, not that shelf space. And you're thinking, well, I had to pull that back and then put this new one in. And retailers have to think about it. They may even have to train their personnel. How do they talk about the product? You go into a store in the mall, the folks that are selling seem to know about every different company, every different product. They understand the differences. But now that education has to take place. And it could be a really positive one where you're saying, hey, this is something that the consumers are going to love because they really now have this desire to have products that have less PFAS in it than more. And that could be something that's a great conversation starter. So, um, anyways, and then what we often forget, and I found this true when I was inside companies as well as on the outside, is communication, even with the folks in the company. There's a change, a strategic change in direction that is maybe prompted by regulatory change in the environment. And a lot of times people are saying, wait, I thought that was a great marketing campaign. I worked on that team. I don't understand why they're not going to run with that. Why is this changing? I don't get it. Nobody told me. I don't understand what's going on. So that clear internal communication, as well as to your partners, there's a change happening. I've gotten requests when we inside the world I was sitting in would say, hey, we have to make a change here. And I would get a call immediately from the sales team or the marketing team. What do I tell my partners? I got to tell something. Do you have a slide deck? What do you have for me? And I can only say, and I can only tell them so much. I don't want to take up all the time with my partner discussion on this, but I need to say something. Do you have an FAQ? Do you have something I can answer? Those questions often get left to the end. And then the marketing folks are saying, how come nobody's telling me? And so we see those kinds of things happening as well. So then we go into, in a sense, as we're going through this, what we're realizing is every step is critical to the next step, but at the same time is building on the step that happened before. So when you start with, let me go back to the slide here. When you start with a regulation passing and you're sitting down and saying, what does this really mean? All these pressures, let's call everyone together. It's an interesting thing to say because what I found in one company, I actually hired a consultant to say, you know what, a lot of people work on safety in this company. I sometimes hear it. I think there's probably about 15, 20 people I've dealt with. And I hired a consultant to literally examine our company and ask the question, who's working on safety in what capacity? Is it a product area? Is it a marketing? Is it a research area? Is it legal, regulatory, policy? Turned out that company had 90 different people working on safety. And then we formed a task force, an internal task force to say, these things are constantly moving. How do we get from A to B to C to release to market in a way that things are smooth, that no one is surprised, that people are on board, that there's a push in everyone pushing, kind of like a sports team, pushing in the same direction to get that goal, to get that win to happen. And so if we go through what we were talking about, and now we're going to give you these slides so you have this, but in a way, sometimes people say, well, who's supposed to drive this? And interestingly, in my mind, the regulatory team, and sometimes it's the same one and the same inside, working for, let's say, working with the folks in our Venable law firm side. If you're doing that, starting there to really shape and explain and calling that meeting also sends a really strong signal. And that is, look, this is important. It's a regulation that's going to require some kind of compliance, but we completely understand the challenges that you face in product or R&D or marketing or labeling or supply chain or what's happening on the ground. And let's say you're getting something from overseas that has already a contract in place for 5 years and you're going to have to deal with that. All of those kinds of things, you're starting to help people understand not only what you know, but also learning from them of what their roadblocks are and what their challenges are and what their current roadmaps are. And current roadmaps can make or break a company when there's a change in that, in terms of getting something out the door in the proper way. So overall, these are the things that I wanted to cover today, really to highlight that there's an opportunity here, despite the fact that the world is becoming more regulatory, whether it's in PFAS or any of the different types of regulations that affect the cosmetic industry and the beauty industry overall. And I wanted to stop here, take questions, bring Tarina back in. So, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, Hemu. It doesn't look like we have any questions for our webinar chat. So I think we can go ahead and probably close it off. Thank you
Okay.
everyone for attending the event. We really appreciate you all coming and listening to Hemu speak here about how to create a comprehensive and holistic compliance program. Hemu, I'll let you close it off with any final words.
Thanks a lot, Tarina. And by the way, I do have to say for the team that put this together, um, inside of Venable, thank you for doing that. This is so smooth. It's kind of it's wonderful to not have to worry about anything. So I will say when you do these kinds of things, it brings you not only cross-company alignment, and it brings effective long-term compliance, not just short-term, but also many times you realize regulations, you can take advantage of them and make them good for business. And that's something that sometimes not everyone is thinking about when they get the call from legal or the internal communication or the external one coming in from your outside counsel. People may not be realizing this is actually a positive thing that we can take full advantage of. And customers and folks who are going and buying these products are also thinking the same way, especially in the connected world that we live in, and in a world that the direction is been set by the government. There's a clear movement in what we're going to see happening more and more in the future. And if you do it right, you build long-term trust, you bring brand loyalty, you get what I would call stickiness with your customers. Um, and overall, I will say thank you for listening. Any calls, reach out to us. And we're going to give you the names of some of the lawyers that I was mentioning that I think you would actually love working with if you had that chance. Um, with that, I will send it back to you, Tarina or Kate, if what the next step is here. I have a note in the chat.
Yes.
And the CLE code is is beauty, capital B, industry, capital I, 25. All no spaces, beauty industry 25. Let me say it again, beauty industry 25. Thank you for joining. Have a good afternoon.